She was walking home at night and thought that a man in a hoodie was going to attack her. But he whispered, "Keep walking." What happened next changed her life forever. Subscribe and write in the comments where you're watching this video. The neon sign above Eddie's grill buzzed faintly in the damp night air, its flickering letters casting irregular shadows on the rain-slick sidewalk. Inside, the last of the chairs had been stacked upside down on the tables, the kitchen lights dimmed, and the lingering aroma of fried food hung faintly in the air. Ciara Jennings wiped down the front counter one last time, methodically folding her cleaning rag and placing it under the register before heading to the back to grab her coat. The old diner clock ticked stubbornly toward midnight, and beyond the glass door, the quiet streets of East Atlanta stretched out like a still, dark ribbon. Ciara wasn't one to linger. She moved with quiet efficiency, the result of years spent closing alone, with no one to call or wait for her. At 29, she had carved out a space for herself that was steady, if unremarkable. Each day she poured coffee for the same faces, remembered their orders, smiled politely, and quietly tucked away whatever tip money she earned into a worn envelope labeled "Someday." Someday she would go back to school. Someday she would open her own cafe. Someday when life stopped demanding so much of the present. She pulled on her threadbare coat and grabbed the plastic takeout bag she had prepared before locking up. Inside were leftovers from the day. A cheeseburger wrapped in foil, a small side of fries, and a slice of cherry pie. She often brought food to a couple of men who gathered near the bus station 3 blocks down. It made her feel useful, needed maybe, even if no one ever asked her to. Pushing open the heavy door, she stepped out into the drizzle. The street lights cast a pale amber glow over the wet pavement, and the city had long since quieted. Her boots clicked softly against the sidewalk, the sound swallowed by the night. She turned right, heading toward the narrow pedestrian path that cut through the back of a grocery store and emerged near her apartment complex. It was a shortcut she'd taken dozens of times, faster, quieter, and just a little darker than the main road. As she reached the mouth of the alley, a sudden awareness prickled at the back of her neck. A sort of feeling that couldn't be explained, only felt. Something amiss, a break in the rhythm of a familiar route. She glanced over her shoulder. Nothing obvious. Just the dim stretch of empty sidewalk and the shuffle of raindrops landing in puddles. Still, her hand tightened around the plastic bag. She stepped forward, the soft squelch of her soles pressing into the slick concrete. Halfway through the alley, she heard it. Footsteps behind her. Light, but deliberate. Not the casual pace of someone passing by, not the uneven rhythm of someone in a hurry. They mirrored hers, too close. Her heart stuttered. She kept walking, quickening her stride, her breathing shallower now. The bag swung at her side. "Don't panic," she told herself. "You've walked this alley 100 times. It's just someone heading home. Maybe it's nothing." But the footsteps did not retreat. They advanced. She reached instinctively for the phone in her coat pocket, but before her fingers touched it, a hand gripped her upper arm. She jerked in place, spinning toward the contact. Her eyes met the figure of a tall man cloaked in a damp hoodie, his face obscured beneath the shadow of his hood. Her mouth opened in a gasp, but before she could cry out, he spoke. Quiet, urgent, and startlingly calm. "Don't scream," he said. "Keep walking. Just keep walking." Ciara froze, her pulse thundering in her ears. The hand on her arm wasn't squeezing, not hurting her. It was steady. She looked into his eyes, the only part of his face she could clearly see, and saw something strange. Focus, not aggression. He wasn't looking at her. He was watching something behind her. Her gaze flicked over her shoulder, and she caught the briefest glimpse of two figures further back in the alley, lurking, half-shrouded by a dumpster. "Keep walking," he repeated, a notch softer now. "They've been following you since the diner. Don't look again." Ciara hesitated, her instincts torn between fear of him and fear of the unknown, but something in his voice, its steadiness maybe, or its lack of demand, compelled her to move. He kept close, not holding her anymore, but guiding, placing his body subtly between hers and the alley's shadows. Together, they crossed to the far end, emerging into the glow of a street lamp near the corner of a closed laundromat. Once they were in the light, he stepped back. She turned to him, words caught in her throat. "I'm sorry for grabbing you," he said, hands raised in surrender. "But I didn't know how else to warn you." She stared, processing. Who are you?" "Name's Travis," he said simply. "I was sitting across the street, saw them watching you, figured I'd rather scare you than watch something worse happen." His voice was low, hoarse in a way that suggested it wasn't often used for conversation. His jacket was worn, his boots mismatched, and now that she could see him fully, his appearance was unmistakably that of someone who had seen better days. She turned slightly, peering back into the alley. The figures were gone. Her breath came out in a visible cloud. 1,000 thoughts rushed through her mind, but one took precedence. "Thank you," she said, her voice quiet but firm. He nodded, brushing a hand over his damp sleeve like he didn't know what to do with himself now. Without another word, she reached into her plastic bag and pulled out the burger wrapped in foil. She extended it to him. "It's still warm." He blinked, hesitant. "You sure?" "I'm sure." He took it slowly, eyes on her rather than the food, as if waiting for the catch. But there was none. She turned to go. "Take care of yourself," she said. "You too," he replied almost to himself. As she walked away, the chill clinging to her coat seemed a little lighter. Her thoughts whirled. What if he hadn't been there? Who were those men? How long had they been watching her? The answers frightened her, but beneath the fear, something else burned. An odd, unexpected gratitude. Not just for her safety, but for the stranger who chose to care. The next morning, the encounter replayed in her head like a film she didn't know how to end. She poured coffee, took orders, smiled at customers, but her thoughts drifted. Who was Travis? Where did he go after she left? She found herself looking out the front window between shifts, scanning for his outline. The night had shown her something fragile and unspoken, that even in a world where people so often passed each other unseen, one person stepping in could mean everything. She didn't know why he had helped her. She didn't know what it would mean. But she knew this: the path home would never feel quite the same. And neither would she. The next few days unfolded as if nothing had happened. Ciara continued working her usual shifts, pouring hot coffee into chipped mugs and scribbling down orders with her practiced shorthand. The regulars still lingered at the counter, complaining about gas prices or the Falcons' latest loss, and the cooks in the back still hollered her name when pickup plates were ready. Everything in the diner looked the same, sounded the same, even smelled the same. And yet, for Ciara, something fundamental had shifted. Each evening, as she tied her apron behind her back and counted out her till, her thoughts wandered. She hadn't walked down that alley since the night Travis intervened. She took the longer route now, adding an extra 10 minutes to her already exhausting walk home, but she didn't mind. What bothered her more was the not knowing. Who had those men been? Why her? But more pressing still, where had Travis gone? She found herself scanning the shadows as she walked, her eyes searching the edges of buildings, the space beneath trees, the mouths of alleyways. Each night, she carried an extra meal in her bag, tucked it between her water bottle and notebook, and listened for that steady, quiet voice again. But he never appeared. By the fifth day, frustration had turned to restlessness. That night, after her shift ended and the dishes were stacked and the front lights dimmed, Ciara didn't head straight home. Instead, she turned toward the bridge near the river, the place where she suspected Travis might have drifted after that night. She didn't know why she was so certain he'd be there, but she had seen enough in his eyes, kindness mingled with weariness, a soldier's calm, to know he wasn't the type to vanish entirely. People like him didn't disappear. They just learned how to blend in. The path to the river curved through an older part of the neighborhood where the sidewalk cracked and trees leaned inward as if whispering their own secrets. Under the bridge, the street lights gave way to dim, flickering bulbs installed by the city years ago and left mostly untended. There was a faint hum of water beneath the concrete, and the cold air seemed to carry with it the faintest scent of oil and rust. She spotted him before he noticed her. He was sitting cross-legged on an old milk crate, an open can of beans balanced on one knee, his hands wrapped around a plastic fork. A worn backpack rested at his feet, and next to it, an old military coat folded into a makeshift pillow. His hood was down, and under the pale light, she could see his face more clearly this time. The deep lines near his eyes, the stubble on his jaw, the faint bruising of sleeplessness around his eyelids. For a moment, she hesitated. Then she stepped forward. "I wasn't sure I'd find you," she said softly. Travis looked up, blinking like someone startled from a half-sleep. Recognition lit in his eyes, but he didn't move. "Didn't think you were looking." "I was," she replied. "Every night." He put the fork down and wiped his hands on his pant leg, then gestured to the crate next to him. She hesitated only briefly before sitting down. The dampness from the cold concrete seeped through her jeans, but she didn't care. She reached into her bag and handed him a takeout container. "It's not beans," she said with a half-smile. "I brought extra." He took it with quiet appreciation and opened the lid. Warm chicken and rice steamed into the night air. "You didn't have to do this," he murmured. "I know," she replied. "I wanted to." They sat in silence for a few minutes, the only sounds the occasional rush of a car overhead and the faint churning of the river. Finally, Ciara broke the silence. "I never asked what happened to your sister," she said carefully. "You mentioned her that night." Travis swallowed slowly and nodded, setting the container down beside him. "Yeah," he said. "Tasha. She was 2 years younger than me. Lived here in Atlanta. I was overseas when it happened, stationed in Kandahar. She was walking home from work one night. Took a shortcut through a back alley near her apartment. Didn't make it home." The words were flat, measured, like stones dropped into a deep well. "I didn't even know until the Red Cross contacted my CO. Took them a week to get me back home. By then, she was already gone. Funeral, everything. I missed it all." He looked down at his hands. "They never found who did it. Just nothing." Ciara's breath caught. "I'm sorry. I made a promise to myself," he said. "If I ever saw someone in a similar spot, same look on their face, same path, I wouldn't just stand by." She didn't speak for a while. The cold gnawed at the edges of her coat, but she sat still, watching the lines on his face tighten and ease with each word. "After that," he continued, "I got discharged a year later. Came home, tried to make something work. But the grief, it doesn't just sit with you. It moves in. It eats meals with you, sleeps next to you. I lost my job. Couldn't keep up with rent. Eventually, I stopped trying." His voice didn't tremble, but there was something broken beneath it, something worn down by time and silence. Ciara leaned forward. "Do you have any family left?" "Not really," he said. "My dad died years back. My mom remarried and moved to Alabama. We're not close. It was just me and Tasha, mostly." She nodded, biting her lip. "I'm alone, too. My mom was a nurse, died in a car accident when I was 15. My dad, well, he left when I was 6, never came back. Since I turned 17, I've been on my own." Travis looked at her with something softer than pity, understanding. "That's a long time to carry the weight alone." "I guess I just got used to it," she said. "Work, pay bills, sleep, repeat." "Still dreaming about that cafe?" She blinked. "How did you—" "You mentioned it that night when we first talked. Your voice changed when you said it, like it still mattered." She looked away, a little embarrassed. "It's a stupid dream. Takes money I don't have. Time I can't spare. School I never finished." "It's not stupid," Travis said. "It's the kind of dream that builds something." They fell into another quiet moment, but this time it was easier, companionable, grounded. She started coming back every few days. Sometimes she brought him meals from the diner. Other times she stopped by with coffee or an old hoodie someone had left behind. They talked, not always about the past, sometimes about nothing in particular. Travis told her stories from overseas, not the violent ones, but the strange, human ones. A soldier who used to carry around a pet turtle in his helmet. A local boy who sold watermelon slices to the base through the fence. Ciara found herself talking more, too. About the regulars at the diner. About the old cookbook her mother had kept, with stains on every page. About how sometimes, even when the diner was full, she felt like she was vanishing. Travis never pitied her. That, more than anything, made her keep coming back. She didn't think of him as homeless. She didn't think of herself as a savior. They were just two people who, through accident or fate, had collided in a city that too often ignored both. One evening, she handed him a paperback novel. "You mentioned you liked detective stories." He smiled, running his fingers over the cover. "It's been a while since someone remembered something like that." "You matter, Travis." He didn't respond right away, just nodded, eyes distant. A week later, she found herself lingering after her shift again, holding a binder she'd put together with job listings, printouts from the VA website, and a handwritten note at the front. "Let's try." As she walked toward the bridge, her steps light despite the cold, she realized something had changed in her, not because she was saving someone, but because for the first time in years, she felt like she wasn't alone. Like her kindness didn't fall into a void. It echoed. Beneath the bridge, she saw him reading by the dim light of a cracked lantern, a blanket wrapped around his shoulders. "I brought something," she said, holding out the binder. When he took it and opened it, something flickered in his eyes. Hope, maybe, or at least the memory of it. And under the hum of the city above, the two of them sat once more, no longer strangers, not yet something definable, but tethered by the quiet act of showing up. The binder weighed more in her hands than it should have. It wasn't heavy in any physical sense, just a slim plastic folder filled with a few printed pages, a half-dozen job postings, and a single handwritten resume. But Ciara felt every ounce of its emotional weight as she made her way back to the bridge that evening. The wind had picked up since sunset, and the air tasted like rust and leaves, signaling the coming of fall. She clutched the folder to her chest and walked faster, the beat of her shoes steady on the damp sidewalk. She had thought long and hard before putting it together. She knew she couldn't force Travis to want more for himself. After all, rebuilding a life wasn't as simple as filling out an application or showing up for an interview, but ever since she started spending time with him, she'd seen glimpses of something still burning in him. Sharpness in his observations, a quiet sense of pride when he remembered the old codes from his time in the army, the way he corrected her posture when she mentioned her back hurt from carrying trays at the diner. He still had purpose in him. It just needed a reason to surface. She spotted him from a distance, seated on the same crate under the bridge, bundled in the same coat she'd seen before. He looked up as she approached, a small smile tugging at his lips. "You're becoming a habit," he said. "Good ones are hard to break," she replied, offering the binder like a peace offering. "I brought something." Travis took it from her, turning it over in his hands. "Homework?" "Sort of. I looked up some local veteran employment programs. There's a place down on Fulton Industrial that's hiring night security. They're willing to train. It's not glamorous, but it's a start. I also helped you write a resume." He opened the binder and blinked at the typed page. His name sat at the top in bold letters, followed by a clean layout. Previous service details, skills, references, including Ciara's manager at Eddie's Grill, who had agreed to vouch for him after a long, persuasive conversation. "I haven't worked in over 6 years," he muttered, flipping through. "That doesn't erase what you've done," she said gently. "You served. You led men. You managed logistics and safety in real combat zones. You can handle watching over a warehouse at night." He looked at her like he wanted to believe her but couldn't quite get there. "I don't have a phone," he said. "I know. I added my number and email to the application form. If they want to schedule an interview, they can contact me." He closed the binder and held it on his lap for a moment. "You really think I can pull this off?" Ciara sat beside him on the edge of the low concrete wall, her legs swinging slightly above the dirt. "I think you're the only one who doesn't think you can." That night, he didn't promise anything. He didn't say yes or no, but he kept the binder close, wrapping it carefully in an old t-shirt before tucking it into his backpack. The next morning, while Ciara refilled ketchup bottles and wiped down syrupy counters at the diner, her phone buzzed. It was a number she didn't recognize. "This is Randall Dixon from Garrison Logistics," the voice on the other end said. "I got a call about a Travis Nolan. Says here you're his reference. Is he available for a short interview this afternoon?" Ciara's heart leapt. "He is," she said without hesitation. "I'll make sure he's there." She rushed through the rest of her shift, barely tasting the coffee she sipped between orders. On her break, she ran down to the bridge with a borrowed city map, circled the warehouse location in red, and handed Travis 2 bus tokens. "They're expecting you at 3, she said, barely containing her excitement. "Wear something clean. I packed a shirt from my brother's old stuff. Should fit." Travis stared at her for a long moment, then reached out and gripped her shoulder. "No one's gone this far for me in a long time," he said. "I won't screw it up." At 5:30, her phone rang again. "He showed up early," Mr. Dixon said. "Quiet guy, polite. He's hired. We're starting him next Monday on the night shift." Ciara sat in the empty break room and cried. That weekend, Travis took her to see his new place. It wasn't much, just a single room in an old roadside motel that had been partially converted into long-term housing. But it had a lock on the door, running water, and a heater that buzzed like a beehive. There was a twin bed with a threadbare comforter, a hot plate, and a folding chair. She stood in the doorway and smiled. "This is yours now." "I can't believe it," he said, running a hand along the peeling wallpaper. "I forgot what it's like to close a door behind you and not worry." "Worry about what?" "About someone coming for your shoes," he said with a smirk. "Or worse." She brought him a lamp and a small set of dishes the next day, along with a housewarming card that simply read, "You're home." He pinned it above the tiny desk and sat in the folding chair, watching her arrange the cups like it was some sacred ritual. "Do you think they'll keep me?" he asked. "I think they'd be fools not to." For the first week, he was exhausted every day. The job wasn't difficult, just long. 12-hour night shifts walking the perimeter, checking locks, logging truck arrivals. But he took it seriously, like everything else he'd ever done in uniform. Each evening, before heading to work, he'd call Ciara from the motel's communal phone near the front office. "Still alive," he'd say. "Still earning." She grinned every time. One night, just after her shift ended, she walked past the bridge where they'd first met. It looked different now, emptier, quieter, like it belonged to someone else. She realized she didn't need to visit it anymore. Travis wasn't under that bridge now. He was somewhere warm, probably sipping instant coffee and getting ready for his shift. She felt a strange ache in her chest. Not sadness exactly, more like the hollow space left behind when something good moved forward and didn't need you in the same way anymore. But that feeling didn't last long. 2 days later, Travis showed up outside the diner just before her shift started. He wore the work shirt she'd given him and carried a brown paper bag. "Lunch," he said, holding it out. "Ham and cheese. I made it myself." She laughed. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," he said, "but I wanted to." They sat outside on the bench, sharing half a sandwich and the comfort of earned silence. "You were right," he finally said, "about me still having something left. I just needed a reason." "You found it," she said. "You're the reason." He turned to her, more serious now. "That binder you gave me, it wasn't just paper. It was someone seeing me as more than a ghost. That changed everything." She didn't have a reply for that. Instead, she leaned her head on his shoulder and sighed. "Now it's your turn," he said, nudging her. "Time to talk about your next step." "What do you mean?" "You helped me take one," he said. "Now I help you." She scoffed. "With what?" "School," he said plainly. "The cafe. All that someday stuff you keep talking about like it's a fairy tale. It's complicated." So was getting a job after 6 years on the street. But here we are. She looked at him, torn between defensiveness and awe. "I don't have the money," she said. "You didn't ask me if you could afford it," he replied. "You just said you wanted it." She thought about that for a long time. Later that week, she began looking into community college programs, brushing off old doubts like dust from a forgotten book. It was time to turn her someday into a plan. And this time, she wouldn't be doing it alone. The application sat on her kitchen table for nearly a week before Ciara touched it again. Even after all the progress she had seen Travis make, even with the binder now tucked into a memory box as proof that change was possible, the thought of going back to school made her hands shake. She hadn't filled out a form like that since high school. The questions felt too official, too permanent. They asked about her goals, her transcripts, her work history. Her fingers hovered over the pen every time she tried to begin. What if she failed? What if she wasn't smart enough anymore? What if she never had been? It was Travis who pushed her again, gently but persistently. Every time they talked, he brought it up, not in a pressuring way, but in the way someone might mention rain coming in the forecast. Inevitable, natural. He asked about deadlines, about course options, about financial aid. One evening, as they walked side by side down the block after he got off his shift, he handed her a flyer he'd picked up from a community board near the warehouse, a brochure for adult learners at Atlanta Community College. "I saw this and thought of you," he said simply. "The hospitality program looks solid. Evening classes, too." She studied the glossy paper under the glow of a street lamp, her breath forming clouds in the air. "It's been a long time." "So?" he asked. "You didn't forget how to want it, did you?" She gave a small laugh. "No, I just got used to telling myself I couldn't afford it." "Then maybe it's time to stop lying to yourself." She tucked the flyer into her coat pocket and walked on in silence. But something inside her stirred, a memory of her mother singing in the kitchen, her flour-covered hands kneading dough, the scent of cinnamon and vanilla wafting through their tiny apartment. Back then, the dream of owning a cafe hadn't seemed so far away. It had felt possible, like something that lived just down the street if she walked far enough. Maybe, just maybe, that dream was still waiting for her. The next week, while on her lunch break, she sat in the back corner of the diner with a half-eaten sandwich and filled out the application in one long, breathless session. She wrote honestly. She told them about working since she was 17, about managing customer service, handling stressful situations, solving problems with minimal resources. She wrote about the food she loved, the people she fed, and the recipes she wanted to preserve. And in the final section, the one that asked why she was applying, she didn't write about money or promotion. She wrote one sentence: "Because it's finally time." She mailed it that same afternoon, hands trembling slightly as she let the envelope slip into the box. A week passed, then 2. The waiting gnawed at her, but life didn't slow down. She still opened the diner every morning, still cleaned tables and refilled condiments. Travis worked nights and slept during the day, but they saw each other often. He stopped by before his shifts with coffee for her, and she brought him dinner when he worked late. One chilly morning, just as the first leaves began to turn gold on the trees lining her street, a letter arrived. The return address was from the college. She stood in her apartment, the envelope clutched in both hands, staring at it like it might explode. Her breath caught as she tore the seal. She'd been accepted. Not only that, she'd qualified for a grant that would cover half of her tuition for the first year, with options to apply for work-study programs that could help with the rest. When she called Travis to tell him, she could barely speak. He met her outside her building that evening with a broad smile, arms open. "I knew you would," he said. "The world's just catching up to what you already are." Classes started 3 weeks later. She rearranged her schedule at the diner to make it work, picking up early morning shifts and swapping nights with a coworker. The first day she walked into the campus building, backpack slung over one shoulder, she felt like she was walking into someone else's life. Students milled about, chatting, checking their phones, sipping coffee. Some were younger than her, others older, and all of them looked just as nervous as she felt. Her first class was Introduction to Hospitality Management. The professor was a warm, sharp woman in her 60s who had spent 3 decades running hotels before teaching. From the moment she began speaking, Ciara felt like she had stepped into her calling. Discussions about customer experience, food safety, kitchen layouts, it all felt familiar, like muscle memory. By the end of the first week, she was already staying after class to ask questions. Every evening, she would return home exhausted but exhilarated. Her backpack became a fixture at the diner, propped next to the counter while she poured coffee or bussed tables. Her coworkers teased her about being the student of the month, but they meant it with affection. Even her manager, gruff as ever, began giving her more flexibility with her hours. Travis, meanwhile, became her study partner. He didn't just ask how school was going, he insisted on hearing what she learned. He quizzed her with flashcards, helped her brainstorm ideas for her future cafe, and listened patiently when she vented about tough assignments. One night, as they sat on the steps outside her apartment building, Ciara pulled out a sketch she'd been working on, a rough logo for a bakery she wanted to open someday. It was a stylized hearth with a rising loaf of bread in the center and delicate cursive text wrapping around it. Grace's Hearth. That was my mom's name, she said quietly. Grace. She used to bake every Sunday. The whole building smelled like sugar and cinnamon. Travis stared at the sketch for a long moment, then looked at her. It's perfect. I want it to be more than just a place to eat, she said. I want people to feel safe, like they belong. Then that's exactly what it'll be, he said. You build it, and I'll keep watch out front. They laughed, but even in the joking, there was truth. Their partnership had become a kind of unspoken promise. She lifted him up. Now he was lifting her. Ciara's first semester passed in a blur of early mornings, late nights, and too much caffeine. She wrote essays during her breaks at work and read textbooks on the bus. She barely had time to breathe, but for the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was surviving. She felt like she was moving forward. At the end of the semester, her professor pulled her aside after class. You've got something special, Ciara, she said. You think not just about food, but about people. That's rare. Ciara blinked, unsure what to say. You ever thought about entering the Small Business Incubator program here? The professor continued. We help students create plans, connect them with local investors, even help them apply for city grants. Ciara's heart thudded. No, I didn't think I was ready for that. You are, the professor said. Believe me. That night, Ciara shared the news with Travis over takeout on her couch. So, what's the next step? He asked. I need a real business plan, a menu, a budget, a location idea. It's a lot. Sounds like you're halfway there already, he said, gesturing to the stack of recipe cards she kept on her table. She smiled. I'm thinking about starting with a food truck, lower overhead, easier to move around, build a customer base before going all in. I'll help you find one, he said. We'll make it happen. The use of "we didn't go unnoticed." She liked the way it sounded. In the weeks that followed, they began scouring online listings for used food trailers. They visited local commissaries, talked to other small vendors, and even went to a weekend food truck festival downtown to gather inspiration. Each outing added a new layer to their shared vision. For Christmas that year, Travis surprised her with a small gift, a used but functional countertop mixer. She hugged him tightly. Thank you, she said, voice thick. You're going to need it, he replied. Sooner than you think. The mixer wasn't just a tool, it was a promise. One more brick in the foundation they were building together, not out of romance or obligation, but out of mutual belief. As winter gave way to spring, Ciara looked back on everything that had happened since that rainy night behind the diner. The fear, the stranger in the shadows, the binder, the job, the application, the acceptance. Every step had led to the next. Every kindness had rippled outward. And the best part? It was only just beginning. The first food trailer they went to see was rusted around the edges and smelled faintly of motor oil and spoiled onions. The previous owner, a wiry man with too many cigarette burns on his shirt, explained that it just needed a little elbow grease while kicking one of the wheels with the toe of his boot. Ciara stepped inside cautiously, ducking under the narrow doorframe, and ran her fingers across the flaking countertop. The fryer was coated in a layer of grease so thick it reflected back her own unimpressed face. Still, she smiled politely, asked a few questions, thanked him for his time, and walked away with Travis by her side. On a scale of 1 to tetanus, I'd give that one a solid 9, he said dryly as they got back into his car. She laughed, despite the discouragement settling in her chest. Well, it's a starting point. It became their weekend ritual. Every Saturday, they visited a different trailer, some barely roadworthy, others far out of her budget. Some were crammed with too much equipment, others were empty shells. But each one taught her something about layout, about wiring, about how to spot structural damage beneath a quick coat of paint. Travis took to inspecting the undercarriages like a mechanic, crawling under them with a flashlight and calling out things she'd never have noticed on her own. In the evenings, she'd spread out her notes at the tiny table in her apartment, sketching possible designs for the interior. She taped up index cards on her wall, listing potential menu items: brown sugar scones, lemon bars, honey butter biscuits, spiced banana bread. Every recipe was a memory. Her mother humming over a mixing bowl, her teenage self experimenting with a borrowed cookbook in a too-small oven. The first time she made muffins for the diner's regulars and saw their eyes light up. The turning point came in early April, when a Craigslist listing popped up with a single blurry photo and the words "Needs Love, Priced to Move." Travis insisted they check it out, even though it was in a rural lot nearly an hour south of Atlanta. The drive was long and winding, framed by pine trees and forgotten roadside diners, but when they arrived, something in Ciara's chest tightened with recognition. The trailer was older, sure, its paint faded and its signage half peeled, but it had good bones. It stood upright, no sagging panels or questionable welds. The interior, though dusty, had been kept in decent shape. A solid counter stretched along one side, with just enough space for a small oven, a prep station, and a display case. Best of all, the owner, a retired couple looking to downsize, offered it for well below market price. "It served us well for 12 years, the woman said, her voice tinged with nostalgia. "We used to park near the county fairgrounds every weekend. Folks lined up for miles." Ciara looked around the space again, imagining it cleaned, painted, filled with the smells of cinnamon and coffee. It felt right. "I'll take it," she said. They drove back in near silence, the kind that hummed with energy. She was half numb with excitement, half overwhelmed with fear. She'd drained almost all her savings for the purchase. There was still licensing, repairs, inspections, and supply costs ahead, but it was hers. A dream, once buried beneath fatigue and financial anxiety, now sat on wheels and waited for her to make it real. The next few months were a blur of sanding, painting, and paperwork. Travis worked extra shifts to help with the cost of repairs, refusing to let her do everything alone. He handled the plumbing fixes, rewired the trailer's lighting, and built new shelving from reclaimed wood. She chose a soft sage green for the exterior, with cream-colored trim and a hand-painted logo across the side. Grace's Hearth. It took them 3 tries to get the lettering right, and even then the G had a slight tilt. Ciara loved it anyway. Their days were long and messy. She burned her arms twice on the oven while testing new recipes. He slammed his thumb with a hammer and cursed so loudly a neighbor leaned out their window to check on him. But by the end of each day, they sat on folding chairs beside the trailer, covered in paint or flour, sharing something simple. A laugh, a sandwich, the quiet satisfaction of progress. When it was finally ready for inspection, they both barely slept the night before. Ciara paced her apartment like a storm cloud, going over her checklist until dawn. Travis showed up early with coffee and reminded her to breathe. "It's just the beginning," he said as they waited in line at the city licensing office. "You already did the hard part." The inspector, a stoic woman with sharp eyes and a clipboard, spent an hour walking through the trailer, checking every connection, every switch, every label. She barely spoke, which made Ciara's anxiety mount with every passing minute. Finally, the woman looked up, gave a small nod, and signed her form. "You're good to go. Welcome to the city." Ciara nearly cried. They launched the trailer a week later in a quiet corner of a local weekend market, sandwiched between a shaved ice truck and a vintage clothing stall. She arrived early, stocking shelves with muffins and cookies, setting up her chalkboard menu, arranging napkins and neat fans. Travis parked nearby and stayed close, ready to jump in if anything went wrong. At first, no one came. The first hour dragged painfully. People walked by, glanced at the sign, then kept going. She handed out a few free samples, smiled until her cheeks ached. Doubt crept in. Maybe she wasn't ready. Maybe she wasn't good enough. But around 11, a mother and daughter stopped, drawn by the scent of warm cinnamon. The little girl pointed at a tray of oatmeal cookies and asked for the big one. The mother bought 2 more. Then came an elderly man with a cane, curious about the lemon bars. A group of students followed, asking if she had vegan options. By noon, a small line had formed. They sold out of nearly everything by 2. That night, back at her apartment, Ciara collapsed on the couch with her shoes still on and a half-eaten muffin in her hand. Travis sat beside her, flipping through her receipt log. "You made back almost everything you spent on ingredients," he said, impressed. "You're officially in the black." She grinned through her exhaustion. 1 day down, 100 more to go. They began to build a routine. Each Friday night, they prepped together in her apartment kitchen, packing ingredients and loading the trailer. Saturday mornings started at dawn with coffee and soft music playing from a speaker perched near the register. Travis handled parking and setup, checked the generator, made sure the sign was visible. Ciara baked, arranged, greeted. Customers started returning. Some brought friends. Others stayed to talk. The trailer wasn't just a food business. It was becoming a place people came to feel known, to feel welcome. A woman in her 70s showed up every week for the same blueberry scone and stayed just long enough to share a story about her late husband. A teen who worked in the nearby thrift store would stop by for leftovers and ask Ciara about her recipes. One man came every Saturday and never ordered. He just stood nearby, listening to the music, watching the world go by. Travis called it the orbit, a circle of people slowly gravitating toward what she'd built. But Ciara knew she hadn't built it alone. One evening, after a particularly busy day, she turned to Travis as they packed up. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." He shrugged, brushing crumbs from his hands. "You'd have figured it out." "No," she said firmly, "I wouldn't. I needed someone to believe in it with me." He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "Then we make sure it stays that way." That weekend, she added a new item to the menu, a honey cornbread muffin. It was her mother's favorite. She named it the Grace Special and wrote a small note beneath the listing, "Baked with heart, served with hope." Later, she framed a photo inside the trailer. It was one she'd taken quietly, without Travis noticing, of him leaning against the trailer's window during a quiet moment, a soft smile on his face and his eyes watching the crowd. Beneath it, she wrote in delicate script, "Some angels don't have wings. Some just carry toolboxes and show up every time it matters." And just like that, Grace's hearth wasn't just a dream anymore. It was a promise, rolling forward on 4 wheels and faith. The string lights had been Travis's idea. Ciara hadn't thought they were necessary. Just another expense in a long list of things she was already stretching to afford. But he insisted. "It's not just about visibility," he said. "It's about warmth. You want people to feel like they're coming home, not stepping up to a window." And so they'd strung warm white bulbs along the top edge of the trailer, winding them carefully around the awning and across the sign, letting them spill a soft golden glow over the pavement. When they flipped the switch for the first time, it transformed everything. The trailer didn't just look like a place to grab food anymore. It looked like a destination. They were parked that evening in a new location, a quiet church lot on the east side of town where the community held a Friday night market twice a month. There were live musicians playing acoustic covers of old soul songs, stalls selling handmade soap and jewelry, and rows of tables filled with neighbors catching up over paper plates of barbecue. It wasn't as busy as the downtown market, but it felt more intimate, more personal. The kind of place where people noticed you if you didn't show up one week. Ciara stood behind the window of Grace's hearth, apron dusted with flour, her cheeks flushed from hours of baking. The scent of vanilla and nutmeg hung in the air. Travis leaned against the side of the trailer, arms crossed, nodding along to the music. It had become their rhythm. She worked the front. He kept watch nearby, never far from reach, but always careful not to hover. Customers had begun to recognize him, even greet him by name. Kids waved when they passed. One little boy had called him the Muffin Guard, and the nickname stuck. They were both tired, the kind of deep, satisfied tired that came not from weariness, but from purpose. The weeks since the launch had been a whirlwind of markets, permits, supply runs, and late-night planning sessions. They talked about adding a second trailer someday, maybe even a permanent storefront if things kept growing. For now, though, they were content. It was enough to be building something together from the ground up. Later that night, after they'd closed the window and locked up the cash box, Ciara sat on the back steps of the trailer, sipping the last of the coffee. Travis joined her, setting a warm jacket over her shoulders before sitting beside her in companionable silence. Above them, the string lights flickered slightly in the breeze, casting gentle shadows across the lot. "I've been thinking," he said after a while, his voice quiet, "about what comes next." Ciara turned her head to look at him. "Next for what?" "For us, for you, for this." He gestured toward the trailer. "It's more than just a business now. You've made a space where people feel seen." She exhaled slowly, the weight of his words settling in her chest. "I just wanted to bake. You've done a lot more than that." The truth was, she'd been thinking about the same thing, about how far they'd come, about how something so small, an act of kindness in a dark alley, had unraveled a chain of events neither of them could have imagined. There were still hard days, of course. Days when she questioned if the trailer would make enough, if the costs would creep too high, if the city permits would renew. But those thoughts didn't stay long. Not when Travis was there, not when she looked into the faces of the people who kept coming back. "Do you ever miss the army?" she asked suddenly. He was quiet for a moment. "Sometimes. Not the war, not the noise, but the structure, the clarity, the knowing that someone had your back no matter what." "You've got that now," she said softly. He turned to her, a look in his eyes that she couldn't quite name. "I know." The next day, Ciara received an invitation she hadn't expected. A local small business association had taken notice of Grace's hearth. One of their members had stopped by the trailer 2 weeks ago for a cornbread muffin and hadn't stopped talking about it since. They were holding an awards ceremony in a month, honoring emerging businesses that had shown impact in their community. They wanted her to attend. They wanted her to speak. She nearly said no. Public speaking wasn't her thing. She preferred to work in the background, her hands deep in dough, her thoughts moving silently through recipes and grocery lists. But Travis insisted she go. "This is your moment," he said. "You earned it." So she wrote a speech, practicing it in the mirror, then again to her manager at the diner, and finally, most terrifying of all, to Travis, who sat on her couch with a legal pad and pretended to take notes like a critic. "You're underselling yourself," he said after her first run-through. "I don't want to sound like I'm bragging." "You're not bragging," he replied. "You're telling the truth." The night of the ceremony, Ciara wore a simple navy dress and borrowed a pair of earrings from one of her classmates. Travis wore the only suit he owned, well-worn but pressed, and stood beside her with pride etched into every line of his face. The event was held in the community hall of a historic church, its ceilings strung with more lights, the air filled with the hum of conversation and laughter. When they called her name, she walked to the podium with shaking hands, heart pounding, her speech folded in her pocket. She looked out over the crowd, saw familiar faces from the market, from the neighborhood, even a few customers from the diner. She glanced at Travis. He gave her a small nod. And then she spoke. She talked about her mother, about cinnamon rolls and second chances, about the power of one voice in the dark saying, "Keep walking." She talked about fear, not the kind that makes your knees weak, but the kind that settles into your bones when you convince yourself you're not enough. And then she talked about what it meant to be seen, to be believed in, to have someone stand beside you not because they had to, but because they chose to. She didn't cry until the end. When the applause came, it was quiet at first, then rose steadily. She stepped down from the podium to find Travis waiting for her, his eyes misty. "You didn't just build a business," he said. "You built a life." A few weeks later, Ciara stood in the middle of a church fellowship hall, the smell of garden roses and sugar hanging thick in the air. Twinkling lights crisscrossed the ceiling, and folding chairs had been dressed up in white linen and pale ribbons. She adjusted the hem of her dress, ivory, simple, and elegant, and looked toward the double doors at the far end of the room. It was her wedding day. Not to Travis. That had never been their story. He had become her brother in every sense but blood, a protector, a confidant, the person who walked beside her when no one else did. But when her fiancé, a quiet school teacher named David she'd met at a community fundraiser months ago, asked who should give her away, she hadn't hesitated. Now, as the music swelled, Travis stepped forward in a pressed dress uniform he hadn't worn in years. His gait was steady, his jaw tight. He held out his arm, and she took it. "I'll try not to trip," she whispered. "Don't worry," he said, "I've got you." As they walked down the aisle, guests turned and smiled, and Ciara felt something bloom in her chest: gratitude, peace, and a deep, quiet joy. When the minister asked, "Who gives this woman away?" Travis's voice rang out clear and steady: "I do." There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Later, at the reception, he stood to give a toast. "I don't believe in fate," he said, raising his glass, "but I believe in timing. And I believe that sometimes the people we're meant to find don't arrive with fanfare. Sometimes they show up late at night with a plastic bag of leftovers and a heart full of kindness. Sometimes they walk past you in the rain and offer more than you thought you'd ever receive." Ciara didn't just change my life, she reminded me that I had one to live. The room fell silent, the kind of silence that holds reverence. Then the applause began, and it didn't stop for a long time. Grace's hearth continued to grow. They opened a second trailer the following year, hired 2 part-time employees, and were in talks for a brick-and-mortar location in the heart of the city. Travis started volunteering on weekends at a local veterans shelter, telling his story to anyone who needed to hear that healing was possible. He became a bridge between the streets and the rest of the world, living proof that dignity could be rebuilt, one step at a time. Inside the trailer, Ciara had hung a new photo in a silver frame. It showed the 2 of them standing in front of the original trailer under the string lights, arms around each other, flour on her cheek, and grease on his shirt, both of them laughing. Beside the frame was a smaller image, a dark alley taken from a street corner, now just a blur of memory. On the back of the photo, she'd written in small, careful letters, "Where fear met grace." Because sometimes the places that nearly break us are the very places where we begin, and sometimes it only takes one person who refuses to walk away. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe for more. Check out the next video or explore others on the channel, and feel free to share this one with someone who might need it.